Ask 1,000 people to name a rock song from the 1970s. You won't get 1,000 different answers. You'll get the same 10 titles, cycling back again and again, not because nothing else existed, but because these songs refused to let go. They weren't just hits, they were inescapable. On the radio, in the car, bleeding through bar walls, cutting through movie soundtracks, these songs didn't ask for attention, they seized it. Radio in the 1970s was a different machine. It didn't shuffle, it didn't personalize. It made decisions and then made them again and again, until certain songs became so embedded in the daily texture of life that people stopped hearing them as songs and started hearing them as atmosphere. Background noise that, if you listened closely, turned out to be everything. This is the countdown of the 10 most played songs of the 1970s. The ones radio never stopped reaching for. The ones that outlasted trends, outlasted bands, outlasted the decade itself. The ones that proved something uncomfortable. Being everywhere isn't the same as being cheap. Sometimes ubiquity is just what permanence sounds like at full volume. Number 10, Barracuda, Heart. After a show in 1977, a promoter pulled Ann Wilson aside and made a suggestion loudly, publicly, with the casual confidence of someone who thought he held all the leverage. He implied that Ann and her sister Nancy were in a romantic relationship with each other, not because he believed it, because the band's own label was already floating that rumor to sell records. Exploitation, dressed as marketing. Ann Wilson walked back to her hotel room that night, jaw tight, hands shaking, and started writing. What came out wasn't grief. It wasn't a plea. It was a controlled detonation. That distinction matters because most people, handed that kind of public betrayal, lose their precision. The emotion scatters. Ann Wilson sharpened instead. Every word in what became Barracuda landed exactly where she aimed it. No collateral, just accuracy. Guitarist Roger Fisher wanted a riff with the mass and momentum of Led Zeppelin's Achilles' Last Stand, that crushing, forward-driving wall of sound. He didn't copy it. He compressed it, stripped the excess, tightened the frame, and built something faster, leaner, and more aggressive than the source that inspired it. The opening doesn't ease you in. It hits immediately, with the force of a sentence that has already been decided. No runway, just impact. The title wasn't metaphor, it was accusation. A barracuda moves fast, without warning, and takes exactly what it wants. The industry it attacked handed the song a platform anyway. The same machine being called out kept reaching for it, broadcasting it, making it unavoidable. The song weaponized radio against itself. The betrayal, the precision, the fury that sharpened instead of scattered, all of it was building toward a single moment. And then it landed in a phrase that left nothing ambiguous.
Barracuda.
That line didn't land like a question. It landed like a verdict delivered from a distance, without the need for a raised voice. And then the riff tore through again, carrying the full weight of everything behind it. Radio never found a reason to stop. Number 9, Born to be Wild, Steppenwolf.
Born to be wild.
Mars Bonfire didn't write Born to be Wild for a movement, a generation, or any of the contexts that would later claim it. He wrote it alone, in 1967, thinking about one specific sensation, the road. Not the road as symbol, the physical experience of forward motion. An open highway with no fixed destination, no obligation waiting at the other end. It started as something almost private, a feeling, not a declaration. The song was released in 1968 and climbed to number 2 on the charts. But its real life, the one that earned it a permanent place in the following decade, began a year later, when Dennis Hopper locked himself in an editing room with footage of 2 motorcycles cutting across the American Southwest. He dropped the song over the opening sequence as a placeholder. He looked for alternatives. Nothing worked better. The song stayed. Not because it was the obvious choice, but because it was the only honest one. What Hopper understood was that the music didn't merely fit the images, it explained them. Motorcycles, desert, no destination, no rules. The song wasn't providing commentary, it was the thing itself. And buried inside the lyrics a specific phrase that in 1967 read as pure imagery. Years later, that phrase would be adopted as the name of an entirely new genre. Nobody planned that. The language was already pointing somewhere that hadn't been named yet. Once the image bikes, open road, freedom with a shadow underneath it fused with the music through that film, they became inseparable. Radio understood exactly what that meant. Through the entire 1970s, it kept returning. In film trailers, at the opening of sports events, in jukeboxes, in memory. A song from 1968 that became one of the defining sounds of a decade it was never born in. Number 8, Smoke on the Water, Deep Purple. On the 4th of December 1971, Deep Purple arrived in Montreux, Switzerland, with one objective: record what would become Machine Head. That evening, they attended a Frank Zappa concert at the Montreux Casino, the exact venue they planned to use as a recording studio. During the show, someone fired a flare gun into the ceiling. The building caught fast. Zappa calmly told the audience to evacuate. No one died, but the casino was gutted, and the recording venue Deep Purple had traveled across Europe to use was destroyed. They stood outside in the cold and watched. The smoke spread across Lake Geneva in a flat, gray-orange curtain above the still water. Days later, bassist Roger Glover woke from a dream with a phrase already forming before he was fully conscious. 6 words that held the entire image and refused to leave. That phrase became the title. The image became the song. When Smoke on the Water was released in 1973, it reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. But chart position was never the point. The riff was the point. 4 notes. Simple enough to learn in an afternoon. Specific enough to be instantly recognizable anywhere on Earth. The kind of sound that doesn't require an introduction. It just begins, and the room changes. Generations of guitarists have learned that riff as their entry point into rock music, not because it's technically demanding, but because it sounds immediately right. A disaster in a Swiss casino became the skeleton of one of the most enduring sonic signatures in the history of the genre. Number 7. More Than a Feeling, Boston. Tom Scholz didn't assemble a band. He ran an engineering project that accidentally became one of the best-selling debut acts in American music history. A graduate of MIT, Scholz built his own effects units from scratch, including the Rockman, because nothing on the commercial market could produce the sound living in his head. He recorded the debut Boston album almost entirely himself, in the basement of his house, on equipment he designed and built. The project took 5 years to finish, not because he was struggling, but because he refused to release anything until it was physically correct. The guitar tone on that record, that shimmering, layered, chorus-drenched sound that seemed to arrive from slightly outside normal sonic space, restructured what radio rock was supposed to sound like. Engineers across the industry spent years trying to reverse engineer it. Most produced approximations, none matched the source, because the source was a specific man with a specific obsession and no tolerance for close enough. But beneath all the engineering precision, the song itself was about something no laboratory manufactures. Musical memory, the phenomenon of a piece of music physically pulling you backward into a moment that no longer exists. One melody, heard at the right instant, and suddenly a person who is gone is briefly present. A version of yourself that has already passed away flickers back for the length of a chord change. Scholz built a machine of extraordinary precision to capture a feeling that is, by definition, imprecise and unrepeatable. That contradiction is what gave the song its permanence. More Than a Feeling hit radio in 1976 and never really left. Not because it was aggressive, because it was accurate. Number 6. Sweet Home, Alabama. Lynyrd Skynyrd. Ronnie Van Zant had a specific problem with 2 specific Neil Young songs. Southern Man and Alabama painted the American South with a wide, damning brush. The criticism touched real things. But Van Zant felt the stroke was too broad, that real people and real places were being collapsed into a symbol, stripped of their complexity. He didn't draft a letter. He didn't request an interview. He walked into rehearsal and wrote a response in plain language, putting Young's name directly in the lyric, where nobody could miss it.
Sweet home Alabama.
That line arrives like a thrown elbow, but the story underneath it complicates the easy reading. Van Zandt regularly wore Neil Young t-shirts on stage during the same period. Young later admitted publicly that parts of his own lyrics had been too sweeping, and that Skynyrd's response was legitimate. What sounded like a feud was closer to a dialogue, two artists arguing through music about how to tell the truth about a place without flattening everyone who lived there. The riff came from guitarist Ed King during rehearsal, a rolling, immediate figure that locked in before anyone had words for it. The band built the entire song around it. No excess, no ornamentation, just something that grabs on the first beat and doesn't let go. And there's one more detail that changes how you hear the whole track. That wasn't Van Zandt addressing the audience. He was speaking to the recording engineer, asking for more volume in his headphones during a take. It was never supposed to survive into the final track. They kept it. And that decision gave the song something production polish usually destroys, the feeling of being present at the moment of creation. Not a finished artifact, something still alive. Sweet Home Alabama was released in 1974. Radio picked it up and never set it down, because once it starts, nobody reaches for the dial. Number 5. Go Your Own Way, Fleetwood Mac. By 1976, Fleetwood Mac was held together by professionalism and almost nothing else. Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks had ended their relationship. John and Christine McVie were divorcing. Mick Fleetwood's marriage was collapsing. The band entered the studio to record Rumors anyway, because what else were they going to do? They sat in the same rooms, stood at the same microphones, and made an album that documented their own collapse from the inside. Buckingham wrote Go Your Own Way during the worst of it. It doesn't sound like grief. It sounds like a man who has decided that appearing broken is the one thing he will not allow. The song projects control deliberate, almost confrontational, and then buries the real wound in a line that lands harder than anything in the chorus.
And you isn't the right thing to do.
Nick said publicly, more than once, that the line wasn't true, that it never happened that way, that the accusation was unfair. Buckingham left it in, and then she had to sing backup on it in the same room, at the same session, her voice woven around his accusation, providing harmony to words she disputed. That dynamic lives inside the song permanently, two people remembering the same relationship in irreconcilable ways, neither one yielding an inch, recorded together in real time.
You can go your own way.
Heard in that context, the phrase stops sounding like liberation and starts sounding like a door being closed from the outside. Go Your Own Way became the band's first top 10 hit in the United States. Radio held on to it not because of the backstory, which most listeners never knew, but because of what the song generates underneath the melody. Familiar, unresolved, never quite comfortable. The kind of track that follows you home. Number 4. Free Bird, Lynyrd, Skynyrd. When Lynyrd Skynyrd released their debut album in 1973, Free Bird wasn't the obvious centerpiece. It was long, slow to develop, and didn't deliver the immediate punch of the harder material. Radio programmers hesitated. Audiences didn't wait for permission. The song opens quietly, like a question Ronnie Van Zant is asking himself, not performing for a room. He sings about freedom, about an inability to change, about the particular ache of choosing motion over permanence. It doesn't demonstrate emotion. It carries it the way someone carries something heavy they've stopped mentioning, because they've been carrying it so long. Then the tempo breaks. What follows is one of the most sustained guitar builds in the history of rock. A solo that doesn't resolve so much as keep escalating, refusing to land, refusing to release the pressure it's accumulated. People didn't passively listen to that section. They waited for it. Specifically, deliberately, the way you wait for something you know is coming and still can't prepare for. By the mid-1970s, crowds were shouting the title at bands who had never recorded it, at concerts, at shows, at every live event where people gathered. At first, it was a genuine request. Then, it became a joke. Then it became cultural shorthand that proved the track had moved beyond music and into something else entirely. Radio kept bringing it back because people never stopped demanding it. Not the programmers, the people. Number 3. Hotel California. Eagles. The Eagles released Hotel California in 1976, and before the year was finished, the arguments were already spreading. The theories came fast. A satanic church encoded in the architecture of the lyrics, an asylum disguised as a resort, a hidden confession buried in metaphor. The band denied everything, every reading, every theory, every interpretation that tried to attach the song to a specific hidden meaning. Don Henley offered the clearest answer he was willing to give. The song was about the loss of innocence and the specific darkness that lives on the other side of success in Los Angeles. The price of arrival, the discovery that getting what you reached for doesn't feel the way you expected, and that something essential was surrendered in the reaching. But that explanation still doesn't fully account for what the song generates. The imagery goes further than the stated theme. Something is being withheld, and the gap between what the band said and what the song suggests is exactly where it lives. Every listener falls into that gap. Every listener tries to find the bottom. The mystery didn't damage the song's commercial life. It powered it, kept it generating conversation long after the chart run ended. The closing guitar section wasn't improvised. Joe Walsh and Don Felder constructed 2 interlocking parts, separately, then fit them together until the tension was precisely calibrated. When they locked, the result became one of the most recognized passages in rock. By the time radio embraced it, Hotel California carried everything a programmer reaches for: atmosphere, immediate recognition, and a question nobody can fully answer. Stations played it, then kept playing it, then never really stopped. Number 2. Bohemian Rhapsody. Queen. In 1975, Freddie Mercury handed a recording of Bohemian Rhapsody to DJ Kenny Everett at Capital Radio in London. The instruction was explicit: keep it private, don't broadcast it. The track was nearly 6 minutes more than double what radio programmers considered viable for a single. The label wasn't confident. Everett agreed to stay quiet. Then he played it anyway. The phones didn't stop ringing. Listeners weren't calling because they understood what they'd heard. They were calling because they couldn't leave it alone. Something in those 6 minutes grabbed people and refused to release them, not despite the length, but somehow because of it. The track that every industry calculation said was too long became the one audiences hunted by name, driving it to number 1 in the UK for 9 consecutive weeks. The format didn't make room for it. The audience kicked the door down. The structure alone should have killed it. A ballad that collapses into an operatic explosion, then detonates into hard rock, then resolves into something quiet and resigned. No repeated hook, no predictable architecture. Just a song that moves through territories it was never supposed to enter and trusts the listener to keep up. That level of structural confidence in a pop single was essentially unprecedented. Mercury didn't negotiate it. He built what he heard and handed it to the world. The middle section, that layered wall of voices, that sound that seems to arrive from somewhere larger than 3 people in a studio.
Easy come, easy go.
It sounds like a choir of dozens. It was 3 people, Freddie Mercury, Brian May, and Roger Taylor, recording their own harmonies again and again until the tape was approaching its physical limit. They pushed the technology as far as it would go, then pushed further. The result sounds like something that shouldn't be possible with the resources they had, because it almost wasn't. Mercury never explained the lyrics, not once. In every interview across his entire career, he deflected every question about what the song meant gracefully, consistently, without apology. So listeners built their own answers. A confession, a metaphor, a story with no clean resolution. That uncertainty didn't erode the song. It became the engine that kept people returning. Radio played Bohemian Rhapsody, but people came back to it on their own terms, still searching for something they couldn't name. Number 1. Stairway to Heaven. Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page wrote the foundation of Stairway to Heaven alone, in a remote cottage in Bron Uror, Wales. No studio, no band, no engineer adjusting levels. Just an acoustic guitar and the silence of a Welsh hillside. Whatever he was reaching for, He was reaching for it without a safety net, without an audience, without any external pressure about what the finished thing was supposed to become. The song was never released as a single. There was no way to own it in isolation. If you wanted it, you bought the full album, Led Zeppelin 4. That was the deal, non-negotiable. No radio edit, no shortened version. 8 minutes of music that changed character multiple times within its own runtime, and the band refused to cut it, compress it, or adapt it for a format it wasn't built for. Radio played it obsessively anyway. Program directors who lived by the rules of format and runtime kept scheduling it because when Stairway to Heaven played, listeners didn't change the station. They stayed through all 8 minutes with an attention that radio audiences almost never sustained for anything. The phones lit up. The requests kept coming. The song didn't adapt to the system. The system bent to accommodate the song, and it did so because it had no choice. What the song does, the thing that sets it apart from everything else on this list, is move the listener from one emotional location to another without them noticing the journey. It opens quiet and searching, almost like a folk song, and then, through a progression so gradual that the moment of change is nearly impossible to identify, it becomes something enormous. By the final third, you are somewhere completely different from where you started. Most people cannot pinpoint when it happened. It happened while they were listening, while they were paying attention, and they still didn't catch it.
And she's buying the stairway to hell.
That line arrives like a door swinging open onto something vast. The full image the song has been climbing toward through everything that preceded it. And it doesn't resolve the feeling. It expands it, opens the space further. The song earns that moment completely, and then refuses to explain it, which is the only honest response. The guitar solo in the final third, the one that functions as the emotional summit of the entire track, was recorded in a single take. Page didn't assemble it from composite pieces. He played it straight through, and they kept what came out. One unbroken performance, captured as it happened, and it felt right because it was right. Stairway to Heaven became the most played song in the history of FM radio, not because it followed any rule the format had established, but because the audience refused to let radio stop reaching for it. There's a version of rock history that tries to explain why certain songs endure. It usually reaches for words like timeless or universal smooth, vague words that describe nothing specific and explain nothing at all. The honest answer is harder. Each of these 10 songs carried something true inside. A specific fury in a hotel room in 1977, a phrase rescued from a dream on the shore of Lake Geneva, a correction delivered in plain language that was never supposed to be a fight, an engineering project run in a basement for 5 years. A silence never broken about what the lyrics actually meant. None of them were built for radio. Radio came to them decade after decade because the songs were already there, fully formed, waiting, and absolutely impossible to walk away from.